Welcome to Bat Lessons, the Batman History Podcast. I'm Alex.
And I'm Brian.
And today, in celebration of Halloween, we're venturing back to Victorian England to talk about another possible inspiration for Batman, Spring-Heeled Jack.
I'm super stoked. We have talked about this character a couple of other times in our podcast history. I think we teased it a year ago in the Halloween episode. Yeah,
we did.
Which is why it's coming back. And ever since then, I've been curious what I'm going to learn today.
Yeah. Well, I just have a junk ton of notes, and some of it is just about like Victorian England generally. Like, what is the sort of social environment? What is the history there? It's going to tie into next month's episode too. Spoiler alert. And I just think it's really rich and interesting history. So we're going to do that for the first half of the show. If you're not so interested in that, and you want to go straight to Spring-Heeled Jack, feel free to use the chapter marker. But yeah, let's dive right in. So Victorian England, Brian, what do you like? What's your vibe on that? Like, what do you know about the Victorian era and London?
Industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of smoke and smog. People working 7 days a week, just working is their entire lives. And it is a miserable existence. Like that is really my take on what that time in London is. Oh, there's also, is this around the same time as like the great stink or whatever?
Yes, we're going to talk about that. I'm so glad that you know about it.
Yeah.
So London in the 1800s was a wild place. If you lived in the 1700s, you probably lived in roughly the same way that, you know, your family had done for generations. If you, lived in the 1800s, your life was wildly different than anyone that came before you.
Yeah. Technology.
London grew from under 1 million people in 1801 to over 6.5 million people in 1901. So that's 6 times as many people in 100 years. And this is because of industrialization, which meant that cities became attractive to people looking for work. They migrated for jobs, both from within England, but from Europe more broadly. They came to London to work. And the British Empire was at peace with all the other large world powers. And they probably had the strongest military in the world. So economically, the colonialism that they had sort of been through was very, very good to England. It brought in a lot of wealth.
Yeah, paying off for sure.
Also, the improved technology meant that there was improved food supply. So improved agriculture technology, improved transportation technology. It was easier to make the food. It was easier to get it to London. All of this led to lowering mortality. So people were living longer, which you're going to think is wild. I mean, you alluded to it a little bit already, like people were living in like filth and stuff like that. But there's also like all kinds of stuff trying to kill you during this era. But paradoxically, people are living longer. And yeah, there's a lot of income inequality at this time. I pasted a graph in the doc.
This graph. Okay. So this is showing share owned by the top 10%, share owned by the top 1%, share owned by the middle 40%, and then share owned by the bottom 50%.
Yeah, so this is distribution of wealth.
So through the 1800s, it actually looks pretty stable. And then after that, over the next, I guess it's like 80, nearly 100 years, some of those,
all the way until today.
Yeah, some of those lines cross. So the top 1% drops below the middle class, the middle 40%. And then the top 10% and the middle 40% nearly touch at 1990.
Yeah, but basically, right, like if you're looking at today, it's sort of all of the lines are squeezed towards each other.
Yes, absolutely.
Even the people who are the least wealthy have more of a share of a wealth than they ever have before. And the people who are most wealthy have less of a share than they've ever had. Yes,
that's right. The most notable data points here that I'm seeing are that at the beginning, the top 10%, the top 10% owned 90% of everything, and the middle class, the middle 40% owned 10%. So and then at the end, we've got or like even we'll just say 1990 when the numbers get the closest, we've got the top 10% owning a little under 50%, which is a pretty steep drop. They drop about 40% and change. And the middle class, the middle 40%, own a little over 40%. So those lines are nearly touching. That's a 400, I guess a 300% increase. from where the graph started, like 150 years ago. So that's pretty incredible change that occurred over, I mean, relatively short period of time, especially when you're saying that in the 1700s, generation upon generation, they were all like living the same. And that's like how technology changed things, like all the hockey stick graphs and stuff like that. And this is pretty remarkable data.
Yeah, technology changed this. Some of this was political too.
Sure.
But, when you hear people talk about, how wealth inequality has grown over the last 60, 70 years, that's true. And you can see that borne out in this graph, but it's nothing compared to people who are living in the Victorian era. Like there was a lot of wealth in England at that time, but it was seen by almost no one, right? Like very, very few people are sharing in that.
Yeah. I mean, based on the books, movies, whatever, the pop culture that I've picked up on, my sense is that a general air of hopelessness for the middle and lower class at this time.
Yeah, Charles Dickens books are coming out. You've got, Please Sir, Can I Have Some More? That's very much of the era. And yeah, many people associate Victorian London with homelessness. And they did have a remarkably high number of homeless people. The number often cited online, what I could find, was about 30,000 homeless people in 1848, at which time there were about 3.5 million residents in London. So that's about 0.8%, near 1%. For some context or comparison, today, there's about 46,000 homeless people in the greater Los Angeles area, which has a population of 18.6 million, so about 0.2%. So 4 times as many homeless in London in 1848 as there is in Los Angeles today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you've ever been to LA, like it can seem dire at times, right? Like it's a very
my goodness.
large homeless problem. Yeah.
And full like encampments and stuff like that is like city within a city kind of for the homeless population there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So London 4 times is that.
Which is crazy. It's really crazy to like imagine, because like my brother lives in LA. I visited. I've seen a lot of that firsthand, and like imagining like quadrupling that is kind of insane to think about.
Yeah. And attitudes around the homeless at that time are very negative. So treatment of those people was really, really poor. I'll try not to draw a straight line today, in terms of like the treatment of homeless people, but that's an exercise left for the reader. I think you'll find it's pretty easy. The way that people who were homeless or who were very poor lived at the time was interesting. It's a topic of a lot of sort of pop history. One of the things that people sort of have a mental image of or sort of concept of is what's called a doss house or a flop house more commonly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically, if people are homeless, where are they going to sleep? And the pop history has some things that you probably heard before, maybe repeated on, the History Channel or a podcast or YouTube. They'll talk about things like a penny sit up, which is a place that you would go and you'd pay a penny just to sit. And you couldn't sleep. And, there were people there working the doss house to make sure that you weren't sleeping when you were sitting up. Something that people talk about a lot is something called a 2-penny hangover. Have you ever heard of that?
A 2-penny hangover. I've never heard of that. No.
Yeah. So the idea is that it's a place you go and you pay 2 pennies to sleep, but it's not a bed. There's like a rope that they tie up, and people would sort of drape themselves over the top of the rope to sleep. So like you kind of fold yourself over the top, and in the morning they'd cut the rope. And so like that's how they woke you up, is like everyone falls. People claim that this is the source of the word hangover, for feeling awful the next day. You have a hangover.
This is unbelievable. You're like hanging people up like clothes or whatever.
Hang tight.
Is the hang... Okay. Because when I think penny hangover with this situation, what comes to mind for me is they cut the rope and you fall on your head.
Yeah. It's quite the picture, the mental image.
Yeah, for sure.
Another version of this is what they call the 4-penny coffin, which is the idea that you could sleep overnight in a box on the floor that kind of looked like a coffin, like a makeshift bed. The reality, though, is that these are probably mostly made up.
Oh, okay.
Or at the very, very, very least, very uncommon. There's a really fantastic essay from a historian named Mike Dash, and I'll leave a link in the show notes that dives deep on the claim of the 2-penny hangover specifically. And most of the accountings of 2-penny hangovers are from fiction. So Charles Dickens talks about it in one of his novels. George Orwell talks about it in one of his. Famous fiction writers, people read about it. There are some historical nonfiction accounts, but the oldest one that Mike Dash could find was written in 1890, when all of this would have been coming to an end. And even then, it's secondhand, not a firsthand account, right? So maybe a grain of truth to this, but definitely take it with a grain of salt. But the real history is that you could definitely just go sleep at a doss house, right? So you're going and
Yeah.
paying some pennies to go sleep.
Yeah, that seems completely believable. The point you made about a lot of these coming from fiction actually makes a lot of sense if you think about like the stories that fiction is trying to like give you as the reader. Is you want to show, like Luke Skywalker is a poor farm boy. He turns out to be somebody, right? But like, how did they make him like even more poor than poor? And you find these like fantastical examples, or like an example of like a thing that existed in one place one time that was not common, and then you attribute that like as a lifestyle that your character was living, and then throughout the book throughout the story you change the situation. So I that actually like rings as something completely believable to me, that it's like way overblown or even made up because of like fictionalized characters in history.
Yeah, and if you're trying to paint a picture of this sort of desperation and the darkness and the things that, even if those things are real, it's hard to convey the sort of severity, right? And so you have sort of the fictionalization to make it hit more home, right? Yeah. Workhouses. Have you ever heard of a workhouse?
I've heard of a workhouse. I don't know if I could define one though. A house where you work.
Yeah, basically. Once you ended up in poverty in Victorian London, escaping was essentially impossible, right? There wasn't any social mobility. People were stuck in poverty and homelessness. And if you were one of these people, they would call you a pauper. So the sort of cultural sort of thought was that, there was deserving and undeserving poor. The idea was that there were people who just wanted to game the system and live for free without working. They would call these peepers malingerers, right? Was the idea that like they just want to hand out, right?
Sure.
And there was also a hypothetical deserving poor, right? So this is someone who are hard workers, but fell in hard times for whatever reasons, and those were the people that were truly deserved of being helped. And so a system was created by the government called a workhouse. And if you look at them charitably, they're designed to help people, right? If you need, you could go stay there, right? To have a place to sleep. You could be fed. You could receive medical care, right? If you had children, they could be educated. And if you had good behavior and worked for a long period of time, theoretically, you could get paid when you left, some money for your work. And the work that was done was supposed to pay for the upkeep of the workhouse so that the government or the church or whoever, church actually ran most of them, wouldn't have to pay much or be involved much, right? But the cup half empty look, and I would argue that
I'm so suspicious of what you're talking about.
Yeah. The realistic look is that workhouses were horrific and violated pretty much every human right you can think of. They were really more like prisons, and often were built as
I was thinking about prisons while you were talking about it, and like how you lose more time than you're paying off or whatever. Like it's a cyclical debt thing where you're stuck, right?
Yes. When you showed up, you were separated from your family by age and by gender. So men and women couldn't be together. Parents could not be with their kids. And they took away your clothes, made you wear the same thing as everyone else. And they made you do horrific work just in crazy long days. One of the common examples that people provide of work that was done was taking rope apart with your bare hands. So you'd break it down into individual fibers. This obviously didn't make any money, right? Like the idea was that workhouses were supposed to pay for themselves. Like the people would do work that would pay for the workhouse, but that was almost never the case. And so they just came up with work for these people to do. You were fed, but not well, not a lot of food. You were given medical care such as that existed at the time. Doctors were a thing, but it's not what you think of today. And kids were given a basic education, though, keep in mind, completely separated from your parents, right?
Right. I mean, I can't think of anything worse than kids being separated from parents. Like, I mean, sure, there are like awful tortures and stuff like drawn and quartered, but like this is horrible. Like as a parent of a small child, or even just like a kid who had a solid attachment with his parents, like this is horrible to think about.
Yeah. Usually you were never paid, right? Because the workhouse wasn't making any money. So even when you left, you weren't getting the money that you were promised. And around 10% of people who were admitted to poorhouses died there, right? So imagine you're showing up to go, you have a 1 in 10 chance of not making it out, right? In reality, poorhouses were never about determining deserving versus undeserving. They were designed to be cruel as a deterrent, in a way, punishment. The idea was that if they made being poor or homeless as awful as possible, people would find a way to stop being homeless. Obviously, given that this stayed that way for over 100 years, that did not work.
Right.
Yeah. Not going to try to draw a straight line to today, but I encourage you to do a thought experiment.
I mean, just the comment kind of suggests how much of a connection there is. This also kind of, it makes me wonder if this is a situation where the owners of these places were taking advantage of people to get cheap or free labor, to like kind of devise a situation where they would have cheaper free labor forever because these people couldn't get out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure that happened in some cases. In most cases, it was run by the church. So
yeah, you said that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but okay, but that is only 1% of people, right? That about, or I think we said 0.8% of people are homeless. What about the other 99%, right? Life is crazy for them too. Remember that most of them are still poor, but that they do have homes, right? They are doing work. They are having a life that is quote unquote normal, such as it is. But things are changing really fast for them too. Industrialization is crazy. People are moving to cities out of rural areas for the first time in generations, right? So people who are totally new to this environment.
Sure. Because transportation, I actually was just listening to a podcast that talked about how at this kind of time in people's lives, some never traveled more than 12 miles in their entire life,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, stirring people around, especially like pulling people into London to grow the population so quickly. Yeah, I imagine this was like quite tumultuous.
Right. And there's factories all over the city. And so that's really different. Like, if you can imagine like living on a farm and then going to like, just like black with soot, just smoke belching into the air, packed in with tons of other people. And if you were a tradesperson, you were working in a factory, your life expectancy was like low to mid 20s, right? So people are dying really early. And another contributor to the low life expectancy is the technology, right? So technology is popping off in both ways that are great and awful. So there's lots of stuff that's improving your quality of life, but tons of examples of like knowing enough to be dangerous. So like things that we didn't know.
Yeah, when
super messed up.
They didn't have OSHA, they didn't have the like protection of the labor force or anything. I'm sure they had all these different machines that just had like open machinery with no guards on them and stuff. So yeah, I'm sure people were like losing fingers, hands and arms and feet and stuff at random times all throughout this time,
Yeah, and like what's really interesting to me, because I'm a freaking nerd, is the story of like material sciences at this time. So like manufacturing makes all kinds of things that were previously luxury goods affordable to more people. So people are buying up stuff like crazy because it makes them seem to be of a higher class than they are, because they're having things that previously only the richest people could have. So for example, wallpaper. It's something that was associated with wealth. But if you can make it in a factory, all of a sudden everyone can have it because it's super cheap. So one of the most popular colors of the time was green, again, because historically it had been really hard to produce. Green printing, green textiles is very, very expensive. But advancements in material sciences meant that all of a sudden green was available. Like you could get it. And it was novel. So people are buying it up like crazy. But they didn't really understand enough about material science, because one of the most common ways to make green at the time was with arsenic.
Oh, geez.
Which is super toxic.
Yeah.
So people are living in houses like coated with arsenic on the inside, and it's like flaking off, and they're breathing it all day, and it's making them super sick.
Sounds like lead paint.
It's exactly like
who would ever do that?
Yeah. Another thing they figured out how to do was to do glossy paint, right? They could make stuff shiny for the first time. And yeah, you're right. What they initially did was they added lead to the paint.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe I called that. I really thought it was going to be a lot later than at the same time. That's crazy.
No. All happening at the same time. And like, if you can think of things that you might want to be shiny, like what would you think would be the first things you would want to like maybe paint?
Oh, like, I don't know. Toys?
Kids' toys?
Oh. Woof.
So you imagine it's all over the toys for your kids in the house. It's all over the walls, your door, you're painting it to be shiny. Yeah. And that doesn't just make you sick. That like stunts your growth so you don't get as tall. It like messes with your brain.
Yeah. And lead accumulates in your body too. It's not like something that passes. It just builds up and it gets worse, right?
Right. And you only need a little bit to like mess with you. Like, for example, there's really great studies, even recently, about removing lead from gasoline, which we did 60 years ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. Like recently enough that you still buy unleaded paint, or unleaded gas, which
Right. They
I would
say
say
on the
that
signs unleaded, right?
the majority of the population has no idea why it's called unleaded gas.
Because it used to have lead in it.
Well, I mean, I know that, but I'm thinking
Yeah.
like the people my age that are buying gas and even older probably don't know that history. There's like, it's just called unleaded gas.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of knock-ons other than like people living longer, right? Like violent crime has gone down. And there's a strong case to be made that like that's heavily correlated with removing lead from gasoline.
Yeah.
Yeah. I pulled those examples about paints and stuff from a video that I highly recommend. It's called 5 Reasons the Victoria Era Was Utter Insanity from a YouTube channel called Joe Scott. I'll drop a link in the show notes. Another advancement that happened during this time is plumbing. In the late 1700s, the S-trap was invented, which is basically, what is the requisite to having like a sink inside your house or a toilet inside your house, like to like keep sewage from coming back up the pipe and gas coming back up the pipe.
Yeah. So gas is the significant thing. It's actually kind of magical the way it works. Even like today, those flushless urinals work this way. They have like an S-trap. They've got a fluid in there that is more buoyant than water is. And so like when you pee, the pee falls through and it can go down the drain. But because there's an S-trap, that fluid just kind of hangs out in there without itself going down there. And so all of that with the S-trap, it keeps the gas from flowing back up because it can't flow around the corner and there's liquid in the way barring it.
Yeah, like fully obstructs the pipe.
Yeah, fully. And then it allows the waste to go down. And that's just kind of like the magic of so I think most people are familiar with the concept of a S-trap, even if they might not know the name. But like if you like lose an earring, like it's gonna fall into that trap. Like that's the thing you call your plumber, and they pop it out and you tip it over, an earring falls out, or whatever. That's the S-trap. Is it's that little? I mean, it's shaped like an S, but it's a little loopy thing essentially. That squiggly point in your pipes. That's a pretty big deal in everything. Like that's how your toilet works. That's how your shower drain works. Everything.
Right. So invention of the S-trap. The invention of flushing toilets, and theoretically this should improve sanitation, right? Because now you can get the poop away from your house.
Yeah, or at least reduce the amount of like poop smell in your house as well, right? Like because like a big thing about plumbing that I've learned as like a homeowner is ventilation of like the methane coming from the sewer is like very, very important, or else you'll like blow your house up. S-traps help a lot with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you've ever had like a shower in the basement that no one ever uses, and it kind of stinks, and you're like, why does it stink? And they tell you to like run your shower.
Run the water. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're filling the S-trap with water.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's that. Yeah. London had indoor plumbing for fresh water, and they had it for hundreds of years. So going all the way back to, I think, the Romans, when they, because I think they actually founded London, the city. Anyway, not important.
I'm thinking of the ancient Greeks who.
Oh, sure.
Like a lot of them died because they had lead plumbing, and it was getting into their water and stuff. Yeah, I don't know the dates on that, but it's very, very old. Yeah,
but they were usually using cisterns or cesspits for the bathroom for fecal matter. I can't think of a better term.
Number one and number two. Yeah.
Yeah. Think like a septic field crossed with an outhouse or like a pit latrine. Like if you've ever been camping and there's a pit latrine, it's a gigantic hole in the ground where theoretically liquid waste seeps into the ground and solid waste like breaks down, like just big, gigantic holes in the ground, right? That's just how they dealt with waste. And the medical science at the time was pretty bad. They had some theories about how health worked that were pretty unfounded.
Yeah.
For example, there was humorism. Have you ever heard of humorism?
Yeah, that's the four humors. That's there's the yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm. Yeah. And
you got three of the four. That's pretty good.
Okay, so then the last one, give me a second. It's
No. I got phlegm. Phlegm was the fourth.
Oh, phlegm is the fourth. Okay, because there's another one. There's it's not a humor then, but there's the same kind of idea is when you're feeling melancholy. I think that's the term. It has to do with too much of one of the humors. I can't think of what it is right now, but yeah, there's all this like old crazy, and like your heart was where your thoughts came from, and your blood was to like cool cool your body, not to like send
Uh-huh.
oxygen. Like there was like very, very, I listened to a separate podcast about this kind of stuff, and there's some really crazy little tidbits in there where like one guy one time made an estimation about like how the body worked, and then like
Mhm.
nobody for like 1,000 years checked his work on it until
Right.
like the 1800s or something like that, when they started
Yeah.
actually like taking bodies and essentially like dismembering them, but like to open them up and learn about them. And that like drove this whole trade of, it's not body snatchers, but it's
Yeah, we're gonna get there.
oh, okay. Sorry, I'm jumping way ahead
No,
on
it's
you.
okay.
But
It's
like
okay.
all the connections are coming in.
Yeah. So yeah, like the fact that they've got poop everywhere, you know, in these pits in the ground
Mm-hmm.
is a problem because they don't really understand. The way that people thought that the human body worked was the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. And the idea is that your body is made of those four things. And like they needed to be kept carefully in balance.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise you would be sick.
Mm.
So like the idea is that like if you had like, for example, if you had like vomiting, then like maybe you've got too much blood, right? And so they would do bloodletting. So that's like, you know, either they're cutting you open to like let blood out, or you'd
Mm-hmm.
have leeches,
Yeah, relieving the
right?
pressure.
Yeah. Or the idea was that like if you had cholera or something like that, like you've got diarrhea, right? Then like you've got too much phlegm, right? And so
Yeah.
they're gonna do like a phlebotomy where they're like putting other liquids into your body, right? So like that was kind of like where they were coming from. Another example of sort of like bad medical science at the time was miasma theory. And basically miasma was the idea that sickness was something that came from bad air. That
Yeah.
people who were sick would sort of make the air around them bad, and that it would linger in places and you could smell it. So they had no concept of germ theory, right? But they did sort of like have the idea that like, you know, if the air stunk like that was a way you could get sick, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an aside. If you want to learn more about Victorian medicine, I have some awesome YouTube videos I'll drop in the show notes from a YouTuber named Kazro who like makes dozens of videos on this topic. Super great. So yeah, the cesspits and cisterns stunk in the first place, but they couldn't keep up with the growing population. Remember, 6 times the population in
Yeah.
100 years.
That's crazy growth, like unbelievable growth. There's
Yeah.
only one civilization I can think of that handled it, which was New York City's water system.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because of the way that it was, they didn't know how impactful it was going to be, the way they set up that water system. But like people all over the world are still like studying how that was set up, and how they still have water pressure, even though the population has grown hand over fist over the last like 200 years. Let me interrupt for one quick second, because I did a quick search. I'm in the Wikipedia for melancholia, or melancholy in Greek, meaning black bile.
Okay.
Is the concept found throughout ancient, medieval, and pre-modern medicine in Europe that describes a condition characterized by markedly depressed mood, bodily complaints, and sometimes hallucinations and delusions. And essentially, it's all connected to your black bile.
Yeah, it's so crazy. The idea that like you have like hallucinations, and therefore, you know, your humors are out of balance, and they're gonna prescribe you like inject yourself with like random chemical that we think is aligned with, you know, phlegm or whatever.
Yeah. So you were talking about cesspits, cisterns.
Yeah, so the cesspits and cisterns stink, and they couldn't keep up the growing population. All these people come, they're filling up, there's poop everywhere, and it smells, and they want to get rid of it. So they knew that the smell was bad. They thought miasma theory, right? It's a nuisance.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to get the poop away from people live where they lived, and they kind of sort of had sewers already. Basically, they were just gigantic brick tunnels that they had built around existing rivers and tributaries to the Thames that flowed into the Thames, which is a gigantic river that goes through central London. And the idea was that it would allow rainwater to drain into the river and eventually the ocean. But because of this, because they had too much poop, right, and because of miasma theory, they wanted to get the stink away from the people, they decided to essentially start transitioning away from cisterns and start connecting the drains directly to the existing sewers. So they're putting human waste in with the rainwater and the rivers, the tributaries flowing directly into the Thames. And unfortunately, the Thames is where a significant portion of the population is getting their drinking water, right? So that means that people are drinking feces and they're getting cholera, and it's running wild through the population.
Yeah.
And whenever there was flooding of the river, human waste would end up all over the city because, right, the water is overflowing and it's putting poop in the streets, right?
Yeah.
And whenever there was droughts, right, the river would dry up, leaving waste to bake in the sun along the banks of the river. And there was actually an event that you were talking about called the Great Stink, where it was one such event where there was a drought that summer and it dried up as much as 8 feet on either side. So 16 feet of the Thames River which is just caked in human waste, right?
Yeah.
It's just baking in the sun all summer.
Yeah, some of the descriptions are really horrible. It's like, so like when it flooded, there would be like crap in basements would start like filling up, and like the walls of these brick river coverings you were talking about, those would fail sometimes into like people's houses and stuff. It was like really disgusting stuff. And the description that has really stuck with me was that they put a newspaper like 1 inch below the water and couldn't read it. And and that when the water was flowing, it would hit bridges, like the abutments in the bridge, and it would be like roiling up like dumps from the bottom. And you would like literally see like logs of poo like in the water.
Yeah.
Is just absolutely disgusting. And like, and to figure all this stuff out, like people are out there in like rowboats and stuff in this, I don't know. It's just like a shit river, right?
Yeah.
It's disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah. That is gross. So yeah, when they had this great stink, right, and it dries up and it's all over the whole city stinks like shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it caused Parliament to act. Because, right, if you've ever been to London, the Houses of Parliament are on the Thames. They're right next to the river.
They're right there, yeah.
Right. So the stink was horrible. They wanted to do something about it. And so they did one of the sort of like largest public works that's ever been done, right? And they built a modern sewage system to move waste out of the city. And this was actually a boon for public health because all of a sudden people have tons of, have clean drinking water where they did not before. But they did it not because they were trying to improve public health, but because it stunk.
Yeah.
There's an excellent YouTube video on the topic from the history guy. I'll drop it in the show notes, but really fascinating part of history.
That is really awesome. I'm trying to find it. There's a old sewage pump station, 150 years old in London that, I think it was built during the Great Stink, the 1858, and it's supposed to be like one of the most beautiful buildings in like London, and it's a
awesome.
good place to like go visit. I'll send you some kind of picture or something once I get something good for you.
Yeah. Okay. So people are poor. They're living in tough conditions. They didn't live very long. So what? What does that mean for us? Where we talk about fiction and Batman. If you remember all the way back to episode 2 of the show, you remember that we were talking about the explosion in literacy, right? More and more people are learning how to read.
Mm-hmm.
That's happening at the same time. So there are whole classes of people who are becoming first generation readers at this time. So there's an increased prevalence of novels. Some of them we've talked about, like Dracula and Sherlock Holmes. It also means the introduction of whole new formats of fiction, like the Penny Dreadful.
Mm-hmm. Can you remind us what the Penny Dreadful is?
A Penny Dreadful is a pamphlet sort of style thing. You have like between 4 and 12 pages. You pay a penny, as it was called in some cases, a half penny for basically a portion of serialized fiction. At first, it was piracy of novels, right? You'd split a novel up into like 100 parts, and then you'd sell one every week, right? And then eventually you had original works that were written for penny dreadfuls. You'd buy it off the newsstand at the corner, instead of much like you would a newspaper. But
in my really minor like research for this episode, I came across something that was kind of interesting. It was saying that penny dreadfuls, at least in the beginning, were a bit more like adult related and like maybe salacious materials.
100%.
Which I think is actually like an interesting element of note here.
Yeah, they're called dreadfuls because the content inside was considered untoward. Yeah.
Right.
There's also an increase in tabloid journalism at this time. So like newspapers are becoming less reliable, right? And more sensational.
Mm-hmm.
So people's lived experiences, right, are filtering out into that fiction, right? So there's lots of death. It's really grim. It's really dire. And all of this fiction that's being created at this time is what's setting up the creation of Batman. The people who are making Batman are reading stuff that comes from this era, right? So they're reading Victorian, fiction. So yeah, people kind of became obsessed with death because they saw it everywhere. It's hard to rationalize death when it's so frequent and people are dying so early. And so lots of superstition arises because of death. We talked about it, some of it in the last Halloween episode with Dracula, where people are sort of building a mental bridge from like rabies and tuberculosis to vampires, something that's real to something that's not. And there's other examples of this too. Death photography. Have you ever heard of death photography?
I have. I have. That's all I can say. I have.
Yeah. It's something that starts this time, which is basically the idea that you take a photo with, of or with loved ones after they die, so that you can remember them.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. So the photos with bodies.
Yes.
And
like, if you just Google it, you can see it online, and there's like, they're made to look alive. Like people, husband and wife, where the wife's dead and like she's on a bed and like they propped her up, or like a baby, or like, the idea is that like you're sort of immortalizing the people, right? For the first time in history, people are able to have photographs, right? And affordably so, right? And you're taking, someone that would have been forgotten, and you're remembering them through the photo.
Right.
Also, with the photography came a less common practice of what's called spirit photography, where charlatans, people who are trying to do people, would do double exposures. So if you ever with film, you take a photo and you take a photo again with some element changed. That element that was there but is now not, or is now there but wasn't, is semi-transparent, right? And you're putting the figures in the photo, and this is a large part of the way we think of ghosts looking like now, like a transparent figure, is because of death photography and spirit photography. And in the late 1800s, the phonograph is invented, right? And just like photographs immortalize people in pictures, you could suddenly immortalize the sound of people. So you could revisit people when they were no longer with you. And that led to the rise of like mediums. And, if you have like electric voice phenomena, which is the idea that like you can hear a ghost on a recording or through static, that is where this comes from, right? The idea that like it's a really wild thing that's breaking people's brains. Like you can hear someone who's dead, right? After the fact. So people are getting really into like ghosts and spirits and otherworldly things.
Yeah.
You were talking about this earlier.
Grave robbing. That's the word.
It's a really big deal.
Huge deal.
Yes. The study of human anatomy is increasing. It's becoming very common. And the way it would work is like students are in large classrooms and they're observing autopsies of cadavers, like cutting them up, cutting them open, looking inside. And more and more people are wanting to learn about this and do this. And there's a significant shortage of bodies to be used for this because like people don't want to have that done. This is a new concept, right? The idea of an autopsy. So like you don't have today, like people would donate their body for science. That's not a thing, right?
Not a thing at all. And like if you were a student for like a medical student, they would say like bring your own body, and it'd be like, well, how do I get one of those? Like it's not like a thing you like really buy. You don't go to the store. There's not a catalog for that.
Yeah.
So you have to go to the black market.
Right. A huge black market crops up. Grave robbers, individuals or gangs, essentially keep track of the recently deceased. So they know who's dying. And so they know they're about to be buried, right? They would steal their bodies, smuggle them in for dissection. And this is why sometimes in graveyards, you'd see like a cage around a grave, right? Yeah. It's not to keep anything in. Although like the fiction, like about like vampires and stuff would say that it's about that. It's to keep people out.
And it's also the grave shift comes from this, is people would stay up with their guns and like guard graveyards. And there's like a couple of things that are interesting here that come to mind is that grave robbers learned all these cool tricks to dig up bodies quietly. So their like shovels were wooden because they were quieter.
Oh wow.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's another crazy. Towards the end, they started realizing like because this is a black market, so these are criminals, and they started like making a lot of money doing this, and they were like, oh, what's easier than digging holes is just killing people. And so at the end, they just started killing people, or they'd like go to like tenements where they would just kind of hang out and be like, oh, this person, they're not long for the world, so we'll just hasten their death a little bit, and then they'd have their body, and then they don't have to deal with the grave shift at all.
Yeah.
It's pretty dark. It's pretty despicable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so people are people are living with this. It's becomes part of the pop culture, right? So
yeah,
corpse medicine. Are you familiar with the concept of corpse medicine?
Corpse medicine. I don't think I've heard of that before.
Basically, it's the idea that people eating or drinking blood or flesh of the deceased has a medicinal property.
Seen this in movies where it's like I kill this person or I eat part of them and I am imbued with their power and stuff. Yeah. This is like a cannibalistic thing.
It's sort of oddly bound up with Christianity and the idea of transubstantiation. I don't know if are you familiar with that?
Transubstantiation, no. The other words you said, yes.
So transubstantiation is the idea that when you're partaking of communion, that the blood of Christ, literally, like the wine that you drink literally turns into the blood of Christ, and that when you drink the bread, it literally turns into the flesh of Christ, right? It's not metaphorical, it's literal, right?
Yeah.
And that's a belief that some people had at this time, right? For whatever reason, this also gets bound up in Egyptomania, which is basically the people in Northern Europe becoming obsessed with Egyptian history and artifacts. And with this massive wealth inequality, there's just tons of rich people with all kinds of wealth. And one of the ways that you could like flaunt it is buying artifacts and yes, even mummies from Egypt, sort of a black market trade.
Yeah.
Where people would buy it to use as medicine. That starts actually all the way back in the 12th century, but it does go all the way into the Victorian era. And there's a significant trade of mummies in the Victorian era, and it's not uncommon that people would have what are called unwrapping parties.
Unwrapping parties.
Yeah. So if you're rich, you invite all your rich people over, you have your mummy fresh off the boat, and you get together to unwrap it.
Wow. I've heard of all sorts of like awful desecrations of history, and I mean these are people we're talking about as well, right? That's a type of grave robbing. And I think one of the craziest ones I've heard is that they used to grind up mummies for a specific shade of like brown paint.
Yeah.
And then there was a shortage of that at some point, and they had to figure out some way to synthesize the color that they wanted because they ran out of mummies to be grinding up for art, which is crazy to think about. It's different world.
Yeah. Another Casbro YouTube video, I'll drop in the show notes, is about this topic. It's called Destroying Ancient Artifacts for Profit is Nothing New. If you want to learn more about sort of illegal trade in like art and mummies and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a sort of a unfortunately rich history on that topic.
Yeah.
And finally, the fascination with the supernatural goes beyond just fascination with death. There's tons of examples, but I'll go into just one because it's relevant to us. It's called the Great Moon Hoax. Have you ever heard of the Great Moon Hoax?
Never.
So the short version is that in August of 1835, a real and at the time reputable English astronomer named Sir John Herschel basically goes full grifter mode, right? He does a series of stories with a newspaper in New York called the New York Sun about himself and all these great discoveries that he's just made, right? Mm-hmm. He tells the New York Sun that he has built a 24-foot diameter telescope that weighs 7 tons, and he's taken it to South Africa to observe space like no one has ever done before, right? And he makes a bunch of claims, like he's found planets outside of our solar system and, quote, solved or corrected nearly every leading problem of mathematical astronomy, right? But the claim that catches everyone's attention and imagination is that there's a civilization of living beings on the moon.
Well, everyone knows that.
Including tiny zebras, bipedal badgers, and more. But Brian, there's one particular image that was published in this paper. It's below in the document. I'd like you to describe it if you would.
Oh, I would love to. This is a heck of a picture. Okay, so we've got a very fit humanoid creature. I mean, very, very muscly, but very, very hairy, like Bigfoot hairy all over. Head is also hairy, but like in kind of a, like, I don't know, professorial, scholarly way, like big. I mean, think, I don't know, 70s Grateful Dead hippie. Like
Yeah.
long
Big full
flowing.
beard.
Yeah, big beard, long flowing hair. Strangely, this is in somewhat of like a ballerina pose. And then the most notable characteristic that you see here, or that I see, is wings that go from the wrists all the way down to, I guess, the knees. And they are there's like claws at the end of each of the little like bat points. Yeah. Are those called like scallops? What are those called?
Yeah,
Scallop.
yeah.
Okay, scallop.
I think scallop's technically referring to the cut out. So
okay.
The arc, but the point of the scallop is
with claws. And but the way it's connected is kind of like those flying squirrel suits that you might see. And yeah, big winged beast from the moon, I guess.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
Yeah, it is wild. This is a lot like the War of the Worlds. This is something that ends up in a newspaper, gets published broadly, ends up going all over the world, right? These stories. He ran like 7 stories or something like that, where he's talking about all of his, discoveries, and people believe it, right? Hook, line, and sinker. And like, it's not treated with derision in the newspaper. It's like, this guy built this gigantic, telescope, and he sees all these things, on the moon, zebras and badgers, and this race of people that have these wings that are sort of, bat-like, right? Indeed, he named this species that was sort of like the prime species on the moon, Vespertilio homo, right? And that is Latin for bat man.
Okay. I thought it had, Batman even. Oh man.
Yes.
So I knew it was some kind of bat because I'm so nerdy. But the Batman Begins soundtrack, every song is named a different species of bat, like the Latin name. And Vesper or something or other is one of them.
Yeah.
So wow, this is Batman.
Yes.
Much hairier than I expected, and from the moon.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, people are just like, they're having sort of really wild experiences. They're the first people to live in a crazy age of industrialization. They're living in factories. They're living in sort of filth. There's a lot of death. They're turning to fiction that is telling them fantastic things. They're turning to things that purport to not be fiction. They purport to be nonfiction that's also telling them fantastic things, right? And it is this sort of era, this milieu, right? It's living in the water. It's in the air.
Alex Cash word. Hold on a second. Define milieu. I remember how to spell it from last time. A person's social environment.
Yes.
It's MILIEU.
The point is, it's in the air. It's in the water. It's encompassing you. It's all around you.
It's ubiquitous.
It is ubiquitous. Yeah. Is where sort of the fiction comes from. So yeah.
There's another element that we've touched on, but I think bringing it all together is to say that this is a time of like great discovery, but then also like tons of charlatans, because there is enough science to be like, oh, we're discovering things, but there's not enough science to throw shade or doubt on the BS that people are purporting to discover as well, which I'm sure really messes with the minds of the people at the time, because you don't know what to believe. Even the newspapers aren't being honest because it's tabloid journalism, right? Like I imagine that it is a distressing time to be alive because of the combination of all these factors.
Yeah, you're repeatedly not just being asked to, but being forced to believe the unbelievable, right? Because those things are happening before your eyes, right? And you don't have sort of a basis for, who was it? The famous quote of like, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right? You are observing magic daily. And so why not there be real magic in addition to, the technology?
Yeah, let's see if I can figure out who that was. It's Arthur C. Clarke is what I'm seeing here in Profiles of the Future was his book. Profiles of the Future, an inquiry into the limits of the possible. 1962, formed 3 laws. The third is best known and widely cited. Any sufficient advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
There you go.
There you go.
So, I thought it was worth diving deep because there's so much of Batman comes from this. There's, Dracula, which we've already talked about, Sherlock Holmes, which we've already talked about.
Exactly, yeah.
And then the sort of topics for this month, October, and next month, November, which are Spring Hill Jack and Jack the Ripper, that have sort of a straight line to Batman, which I'll illustrate when we talk about those, that you can just see that like Victorian London is necessary, right, for these stories to sort of appeared. So, do you want to do Spring Hill Jack?
Yeah, man. I feel like we're on a roll.
Okay. So, who is Spring Hill Jack? I'm going to be honest with you. This one has had me on a tailspin since the inception of the podcast. My sister was the first person to ask me if we were going to cover Spring Hill Jack. I was working on the outline for the 3rd episode, so very, very early on in the show, where we covered inspirations. We covered Zorro. We covered a silent movie called The Bat Whispers and The Shadow. And Rachel, my sister, was like, are you going to do Spring Hill Jack? It's an inspiration for Batman, right? And I had never heard of it. And she was so matter of fact that this is an inspiration that I was surprised. And ever since then, I've had numerous people bring it up. Most recently was a comment just last month on YouTube.
Yeah. Darth Arachnius said, I was impressed in your last podcast that you talked about Hogan's Alley, but you talk about Penny Dreadfuls and you don't mention The Human Bat, a Spring Hill Jack story that has several familiar Batman elements.
Yeah, and Darth Arachnius is not the only person to do this, right? Like, we've had numerous people in emails and YouTube comments, right, say like, oh, you got to talk about Spring Hill Jack. And I've been sort of letting that topic simmer ever since. Periodically doing a little bit of research or reading on my own to sort of like slowly wrap my head around it. And it's been essentially impossible for me. Given the way that I personally like to approach research, as I said on the show before, I like to get the facts right when I'm talking about history. Like, and I'll dive in on like very things that, specific things that may not seem significant because I say my bullshit, ometer goes off and I'm like, that doesn't seem quite right.
Right. Yeah.
And I can't get to the truth. And it can be hard with, to get to the truth when there's a popular version of the story. In pop culture, figures like to make their own history, and it can be considered like not as serious, right? So like there's not as much academic work surrounding it. And the thing is about Spring Hill Jack is that it's urban legend. It's folklore. So when people make up stuff about it, alternate histories that are meant to sound cool, stories that didn't happen, it's a feature. It's not a bug, right? People really enjoy the myth building. And when they're learning, they don't really mind if it's not true. It's an urban legend. That's the fun. And that makes my brain melt. I just can't, man. I just can't. For example, Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I always take Wikipedia with a grain of salt because it's crowdsourced, it's self-funded, etc. Don't get me wrong. I like that. It is the strength of Wikipedia that it is those things, but it's also its weakness, right? And I have to say, for this topic, Spring Hill Jack, Wikipedia is an absolute dumpster fire. Just trash, complete and total trash. And unfortunately, the sort of urban legend, pop history crowd is all downstream of Wikipedia. So if you search Spring Hill Jack on YouTube, you're going to find a couple dozen YouTube videos with high production values, millions of views that are uncritically repeating what's on the Wikipedia article.
I hate this.
Yeah.
I've seen this in the wild and I really hate this. Like when you see the same lines over and over again, you'll see like articles that are almost like direct copies of other articles and they're like citing each other. I hate this. Okay.
Yeah. Same stuff over and over, zero citations or citations of other things that are also sort of online. This is designed in a lab to fuck with my head. Like it's just weapons grade plutonium for Alex's mental issues. So many Bothans died to bring you my assessment of Spring Hill Jack.
Oh, good reference.
Let's start with that legend that's often repeated. What do people say about Spring Hill Jack? They describe a human figure that's tall and slender, wearing a devilish mask, that has glowing red eyes, breathes blue flames from its mouth, fingers that come into long metal claws, and the ability to jump very high into the air, over walls, onto buildings, etc. Some accounts like 10 feet tall, some accounts 12 feet tall, right? Jumping.
Yeah.
The person was seen in and around London, right? Starting around 1838, with most reports occurring in the next few years, but some occurring as late as the 1870s. They cite many stories where Jack would encounter women, specifically, walking alone or late at night, or knocking upon their door, right? Trying to kiss them, pulling their hair, scratching at them with the metal claws, injuring them, and then disappearing as quickly as they appeared, right? And they say all of these things as a matter of fact, right? They acknowledge that it's an urban legend, but then they say, like, these things really happened, that there's historical records. We have a concrete account from these women. And if you Google their names, you can find exact stories attributed to them. There's Mary Stevens, Polly Adams, Jane Alsop, Lucy Scales, Maria Adams. Those are the most famous ones.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler, only 2 of these actually happened. Full stop, 3 of them are fully fabricated.
Yeah.
And indeed, the retellings are quite detailed. And the stories are all available online. They're retold in YouTube videos, et cetera, et cetera. Very little in the way of cited sources. So I decided to dig in chronologically. The first story on Wikipedia is that of Mary Stevens.
Okay.
The source cited by Wikipedia is a book called Stand and Deliver, written by Elizabeth Villiers. And this book was published by Stanley and Paul Company in 1928. And as far as I can tell, it was never reprinted. So this is 100 years ago. No new copies available.
So published in 1928, is that when Spring Heel Jack is to have lived? Because we haven't.
No.
Okay.
So Spring Heel Jack, 1838 to 1870s.
Okay.
Or when the reports are happening.
Did I miss that? Oh, you did say that. I'm sorry. Yep, I'm with you now.
That's okay. So this is 100 years later.
Decades later.
Yeah.
They published stories. Okay.
As far as I can tell, it was never reprinted. And there's no ebook or copy online that I could find.
Mm-hmm.
If I follow the 100 years of acquisitions correctly, and mergers, etc., Stanley and Paul now belongs to Penguin Random House. So if anyone,
that's good.
Yeah, if anyone at Penguin Random House is listening, know that there's an audience for an ebook of Stand and Deliver by Elizabeth Villiers. Although in America, 95 years has passed. So in American Copyright Law, the book is now public domain.
Oh, yeah.
So if a lawyer wants to help me out and find that it's safe to do so, let me know and I'll scan it and post it online because I did track down a copy.
You are such an insane person. So for the listener, so we have a video feed to each other and you can watch it all on YouTube. And Alex has in his hand a book that, I mean, it looks like it came out of a movie. It's dark brown. It's thick. It's really thick.
Yeah.
Old. I mean, from
1928.
I bet if you slam it closed, like dust comes off of it.
It smells musty. Yeah.
I bet. It's like bound in flesh.
I had this shipped to me from the United Kingdom. There was a store that deals in rare books that had a listing for it online.
Oh my gosh.
You don't want to know how much I paid for it?
Oh, I do, but maybe don't say it on the podcast.
Especially because, spoiler alert, it's very disappointing.
I imagine.
Yeah. The full title is Stand and Deliver, The Romantic Adventures of Certain Gentlemen of the High Toby, Their Times, Their Associates, Friends, and Victims. The High Toby is slang for the highway. So this is a book about highwaymen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Each chapter is about a different famous thief from history in the UK that would rob people traveling along the road. And the last chapter is Spring Heel Jack. And they acknowledge that Spring Heel Jack isn't really a highwayman, doesn't really go with it. But it's just like kind of goes along with it of like notorious individuals, in history.
Mm-hmm.
It's written as nonfiction, but lacks any academic rigor at all. There's no citations. It's occasionally they say that they talk to people who had first person accounts or that they spoke with a subject or witness, but it doesn't say who, right? It doesn't name them, doesn't have any sources. Unfortunately, I understand this is pretty common for books from the era. It's basically edutainment, right? Think History Channel.
Yeah. Oh, which History Channel? There's different eras of History Channel, but yeah, I'm guessing it's the Ancient Aliens one.
Yes. The book just asserts that Mary Stevens was first. And I believe that's why Wikipedia says that Mary Stevens was first. The first person to witness Spring Heel Jack.
Mm-hmm.
The book says it happened in 1838, and the Wikipedia page says that it happens in 1837, again, without citation for the year. And I imagine the reason the Wikipedia article says 1837, because that's the only possible way to make it the first sighting. One of the most famous matters of public record occurs on January 9th, 1938, where the Lord Mayor of London, Sir John Cohen, receives a letter and talks about it publicly, complaining about Spring Heel Jack, and that there are many sightings of it already at this point, right? So in order for it to be first, it can't be 1838.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think whoever edited the Wikipedia article just made it 1837 to make it make sense.
Okay.
And then she says that she compiled her story by talking to witnesses, right? So she says, I know about Mary Stevens because I talked to people who saw it or were there, right? Secondhand. Remember, this is 1928. So she's trying to put together the history of the story that happened by her account in 1838, 90 years later.
Jeez.
at a time when the average life expectancy in the United Kingdom is 58.
Yeah. I'm thinking this is also like the Jesus story, right? Like nobody wrote down what happened until like an entire lifetime after he had already died.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of word of mouth, stories at campfires. I mean, the game of telephone for 90 years.
Yeah.
Which is almost 2 lifetimes.
Yes.
That's crazy.
When you read the story, it reads like fiction. It happens on a road that she says is called Cutthroat Lane, right?
Yeah, like Crime Alley.
Yeah, it's late at night. She's alone. It starts to rain, and because she doesn't want to get wet, she decides to start running. And that's when Spring Hill Jack jumps out at her, kisses her on the face, lets out a maniacal laugh, and then jumps away. She screams like crazy. Someone hears her. That person, quote unquote, puts up the alarm. I assume that means like ringing a bell. I don't know.
Sure.
And gathers a posse of 12 strong men who come to find her, where she hasn't moved. She hasn't left. She's just sitting right there where she was just assaulted. She's on the ground. She's crying. She's quote unquote hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this sounds ridiculous to me. I don't know if you can imagine how long it would take to gather 12 people together. I don't know what your reaction to an assault would be if you would just stay where it happened crying.
I don't know. I mean, different times in history, right? Like now, if I hear a car alarm, I don't really even look. So
it's true, yeah.
It's a different time where people can start shouting out like, help, some over here. And maybe people do respond. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. To me, it doesn't sound super credible. But you know what? Like reading this, I don't blame the book. It reads like fiction. This is a ghost story, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of sensational and it's supposed to be fun to read. So the book doesn't make me upset. What makes me upset is that people citing it as fact, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Dozens of videos and websites uncritically repeating the story alongside some other stories that do have like newspaper clippings and things like that. The book also never mentions the red glowing eyes, never mentions breathing fire, anything like that. And yeah, even though that's like the most popular depiction that everyone sort of like gloms onto of Spring Hill Jack, just a person in mask with claws who jumps really high.
Mm-hmm.
Villiers, the author, even goes on to speculate that like maybe Spring Hill Jack was like a kangaroo, right?
Jeez.
Which I think is crazy.
Yeah. Crikey.
That being said, I have to tell you that the newspaper clippings from this time also aren't that impressive. They're also cited pretty broadly. And there was a book published in the last decade that I don't want to put on blast. I bought it on Amazon.
All right.
And it has a long list of places where sightings of Spring Hill Jack occurred. And it's stating as fact, like, oh, people saw it in all these places. And I was going, oh man, that's a lot of sightings. There must be so much circumstantial evidence that this was a real thing. So I followed the citation given for that list, which is an article from January 10th, 1938 in a paper called The Morning Chronicle. And I kid you not, the title of the column is Credulity, the Ghost Story.
That's funny.
Never has credulity or superstition been more strongly exemplified in the ghost story alluded to by the Lord Mayor of Mansion Home on Monday last, as having frightened the village of Peckham from its property, which has a wider range of circulation than any previous tale of the kind on record. The following are some particulars of an alleged prank of a ghost, imp, or devil, who, as has been stated, is by many persons believed to be a member of a certain band of aristocrats who, for a wager, has undertaken to personify a supernatural being. The story had its origin in the neighborhood of Barnes, Surrey, about 4 months since, when it was alleged that, in the shape of a large white bull, he attacked several persons, particularly females, many of whom had suffered most severely from the fright, and no respectable female has since left home after dark without a male companion. At East Sheen, in the form of a white bear, the alleged ghost carried on similar pranks. His ghost ships then extended his freaks to the neighbor sublurious regions inhabited by the celebrated Maids of Honor. In the course of a few days afterwards, all Richmond teemed with tales of females being frightened to death and children torn to pieces by the supposedly unearthly... Yes. Torn to pieces by the supposedly unearthly visitant, who was, in the consequence, so closely searched after by the local police that he soon thought it prudent to quit the green lanes of the fashionable resort for the quiet and retired villages of Ham and Petternham. I don't know. Where in the image... Anyway, you get the idea.
Petersham. I'm guessing.
Oh, Petersham.
Because they're all those are pronounced differently, like Worcestershire.
Yes.
But yeah, this paints a kind of a vivid picture of, and my BS meter is going crazy. as well, right?
Right. Well, because I think the article is not even taking it very seriously either. It's just like listing all the places that they've heard reports from in passing, right? It's just like they saw something, people were scared, women, didn't want to go places without men, right? And it keeps going and going and going. Hampton Wick, Court, Beerby Park, Scion Park, Heston, Drayton,
the Royal Palace of Kensington,
right? This whole article is just that over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
The next to last paragraph. In consequence of the above ridiculous stories, some parties adopted every means for obtaining information on the subject and personally visited many of the places above mentioned. It was found that although the stories were in everybody's mouth, no person who had actually seen them could be ascertained. So this is the article that they're citing, like, here's where all the sightings were. And in the article, they're saying, we sent people
couldn't find any
first-hand accounts. They
evidence.
couldn't find any.
Yeah. The explanation that I saw in some of the research I did is that Spring Heel Jack did not exist, but it was this like concept in vogue at the time. It was in the zeitgeist, and there were women that were being attacked, probably by people they knew, and it was safer for them to blame Spring Heel Jack than actually name the person that had assaulted them.
I've heard that too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I promise I'm not just going to complain. I did find some excellent sources as well. If you want the best and most even-handed telling from a pop history perspective, I highly recommend a YouTube video from a channel run by PBS called Storied. And it came from a series that they did called Monstrum, put on by Dr. Emily Zarka, who's faculty at Arizona State, who specializes in philosophy and English and British romantic literature. I'll drop in the video in the show notes. If you're looking for more in-depth scholarly writing, I highly recommend John Mackley. He's a professor at Richmond University, the American International University of London, which is a very long name for a school.
Mm-hmm.
He has a PhD in English from the University of York, and he's the one to thank for preserving the history of Spring Heel Jack and the Penny Dreadfuls. And over just the last few years, he's put together a set of books and ebooks called the Spring Heel Jack Library, across 7 volumes that piece together every known published Penny Dreadful fiction with the character, piecing together chapters from various libraries around the world. Like there were, he started like at the English library, right? And they only had certain ones. Then he goes to like California and gets others, University of Michigan, like piecing together all of these, transcribing them, which like things that were, in print from 100 years ago, like aren't always of the highest quality, right? Like the papers in it's very fragile, right? And like the text is hard to read. And so like he's transcribing it, right? And editing it and cleaning it up. Highly recommend it. And I think it's safe to say that some of the history and the stories wouldn't be preserved if it weren't for him. Yeah, definitely not for us, 2 curious dudes in America trying to figure it all out.
I mean, I'm grateful that people like him exist, just in general, that want to spend the time figuring out this stuff, pulling it together, rewriting it, making it, like digitizing it in ebook format. So you don't have to like start a podcast and request a Random House to do it.
Yeah. Get things reprinted that are 100 years old that have never been printed before. Yeah. He also has a blog where he's written about putting together the library a few times, and he recounts similarly finding dead ends, just like I did. I don't know if you want to read this block quote.
Sure. I'd read online that Jack had been seen in Northampton, and I thought that would be an interesting local focus. But aside from brief overviews, quote, one notable appearance in Northamptonshire in 1843, end quote, there were hardly any details. It was at this point that I saw that one of the major studies on Jack had been written by Mike Dash, published in 14 studies. That's not 14 like the number 14. Never seen that.
Yeah,
anyway.
Like 40-in, I think maybe, Fortean.
Oh, it might be 40-in studies.
I have no idea.
Anyway.
Academic journal.
Yeah. I wrote to him and asked if he could offer a little more insight into what had happened in Northamptonshire. His incredibly prompt answer surprised me. He explained that in 1977, an author called Peter Haining had written his publication, The Legend and Bizarre Crimes of Spring-Heeled Jack, and had simply fabricated evidence. Holy smokes. Dash refers to this kind of fabricated evidence as fake lore. Oh, man. So, Haining had presented a fictionalized version of the first assault that on Polly Adams, as she walked home towards the end of 1837, But this was not just fictionalized, it was wholly fabricated. It never happened.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. That's quite an indictment.
Yeah. And if you watch videos about Spring Heel Jack on YouTube, they'll cite Polly Adams. That is a story that people tell.
Mm-hmm.
Totally made up.
I would be kind of curious if you're looking up like Spring Heel Jack, if there is a distinction in those like YouTube videos to say like this is who Spring Heel Jack was versus like this is the folklore or the urban legend of Spring Heel Jack as like a distinction, because like I'm also keeping in mind that the people in 1937 or whatever that saw this stuff and were inspired to make Batman, they didn't look into the historicity of Spring Heel Jack. Sure. It was just an inspiration, you know? So I'm trying to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, fair enough. It is definitely the case that like people are making edutainment, right? Like it is entertainment. And so that's what I was saying earlier is that, like, feature not a bug, right? Like it's an urban legend. People want to learn the legend, right? So I don't blame them. What bothers me is that it is intermixed with things that did happen. So for example, the accounts of Jane Ailsop and Lucy Scales, we're pretty sure those happened because it's kind of sad, but they were part of the upper class, right? Like I'm pretty sure Jane Ailsop's father was part of the police, part of Scotland Yard or something like that. Yeah, it just like there are court documents and there's police interrogations and there's tons of newspaper accounts and like she actually talked to them, right? And she is the first one that talks about the blue flames, right? So there are some things that like at least there's like semblance of historical record about, right?
Yeah.
That you could say we're pretty sure something happened. Like we don't know if it was actually Spring Heel Jack. Like maybe you were saying earlier, like they're saying it's Spring Heel Jack because that's a convenient sort of like way to shunt blame away from like but it's mixed in with things that we know are not true.
Yeah.
And that bothers me. Probably shouldn't but I have a problem, right? So
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is all really fascinating. So I guess my comment wasn't to be taken any certain way. I was just kind of thinking about how there's probably a plethora of stuff out there, and some of it probably does talk about like this is who Spring Heel Jack was and is wrong. Yes. And then there's other stuff that's like this is the story of Spring Heel Jack, and you know, which is more like what you're describing, like what you are presenting. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is something the newspapers are running with because it's fun. It's an urban legend. A man in mask who can jump very tall, seen late at night. Why does this sort of blip of like folklore from 200 years ago persist into our social consciousness today? Why are we all talking about it? Why do we remember it? And what does it have to do with Batman? Spring Heel Jack very quickly made the jump from fiction, from fiction parading as nonfiction to just straight up fiction, right?
Yeah.
In 1838, that same year, March 5th, just a few months after the letter to the mayor, right? At the Royal Pavilion Theater, there was a stage play about Spring Heel Jack. We don't have a script for it. We don't really know much about it other than like they were advertising that you could go see a play.
Time in history where they didn't keep track of things, right?
Yeah.
We didn't even start doing that until like kind of recently, as evidenced by like the BBC like just deleting and overwriting a bunch of Doctor Who, and they were gonna do Monty Python.
Monty Python's.
Yeah. And they Monty Python's circus, something circus,
magic
circus, and they saved it.
Yeah,
but Anyway,
we know that there was a famous horse race. Famous racehorse named after Spring Heel Jack.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
At the time in the mid 1800s.
That's fun.
Yeah, in 1848 there was, quote, a new comic ballet at the Royal Hull Theatre called Spring Heel Jack. And by 1863, there was the first Penny Dreadful featuring Spring Heel Jack. Penny Dreadfuls containing him were very popular and would continue all the way into the 1910s. So like I said earlier, J.S. Mackley put together the Spring Heel Jack library. There's over 7 volumes of that published so far. The one I had you read in prep for this episode, it was from that very first Penny Dreadful in 1863. I had you read the first 2 chapters.
Yeah.
Of which there were 40. So it's basically a
No
novel.
way. Okay.
Yeah. A novel split up into 40 parts. And by the way, Penny Dreadfuls at the time were kind of wild. They would just stop in the middle. Like they could stop mid-sentence.
Mid-sentence?
Literally, they just chopped up a novel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they kind of assumed that you were picking it up on a regular basis.
Wow.
Yeah. What do you want to talk about? Like you read it. How'd you like it?
Well, I mean, I think that with the way that you've kind of laid things out and described them, it is, I guess, obvious to me that there is more fiction out there about this urban legend than there is like firsthand, like historical account. And I think this is a thing that we see in the world in general, like Abraham Lincoln and zombies, for example, or like there's tons and tons of stuff about like Jack the Ripper that cannot be backed up with any kind of like historical accuracy at all. It's just made up for the fun of fun, So there might be some nugget of truth out there that got the snowball rolling on Spring Hill Jack, but I think the vast majority of things that we've run across in our own, like even the stuff that I was reading or watching, I watched on YouTube. They were like throwing a lot of shade on Spring Hill Jack and like the urban legend, but then also like talking about like what the beliefs were because of all the BS that was flying around and stuff. It's kind of a fascinating, I guess, study on culture and how, I don't know, even today, like there is the news and there's like the spin on the news for like what will sell better or not, etc. And this seems like kind of in that same vein. It's kind of fascinating. So then you had me read these Penny Dreadfuls, and like out of the gate, I was like, oh, this is 1,000% this is fiction, because it's like it's like a first person account of Spring Hill Jack and what he was doing, what he was seeing, what he was thinking, and stuff like that. And it does pretty quickly set him up as a kind of a hero. To say that, I mean, the first chapter I read is he's a kind of a trickster. He goes to a bar, he talks to the police who's there, and like kind of like pulls some attention toward himself by like buying some people's drinks, and then like asking the police officer, like, "Are you afraid of Spring Hill Jack?" And the police
officer, have you ever seen Spring Hill Jack?
Yeah, he's like, "No, I haven't seen him, but like I don't know what the big deal is. If I saw him, I'd arrest him right away." Yeah. And this unknown guy that we as the reader know as Spring Hill Jack is like, oh, well, how about we make some bets? I bet you see him tonight. I bet he scares the pants off you and you don't do what you're saying. And the police officer's like, well, I bet you're wrong on those things. And I will. And if it is true that I run into him tonight, he'll be in jail tomorrow.
Yeah. He's talking a really good game.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back and forth, and it is in this like old style prose, I guess. It's at times it's kind of hard to follow. There was like a whole page of just like quotes back and forth of what they were saying to each other.
They don't say who it was.
It doesn't say who it was. It's between three people at times.
But you're supposed to kind of infer.
And you kind of figure it out a little bit, but it was hard to follow. I really would have liked like every now and then like a said Jack or something like that. But
sure.
Anyway, really interesting back and forth with all that stuff, and then basically he like bends down to like tie his shoe or something innocuous like that, and then that's when he like pulls his mask down, he jumps back and he's like, I'm Spring Hill Jack, mother. And and the police officer jumps back in surprise, and then Spring Hill Jack's basically like, I won my bet. And he like scares him, he runs off, and then he just humiliates this police officer, and that's like chapter 1.
He jumps on his shoulders and pulls the police officer's hat over his eyes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, very comic. Yeah.
It's super, sort of like comic violence, and then jumps away.
Yeah, very cartoony.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like that first chapter, very much they're just setting up as like a trickster, as like a prankster of like, and they go out of their way to say like, oh, he never killed anyone, right? Like people are afraid of him, but like
he scared people literally to death. He didn't really harm people. He didn't take their money. And I did actually write down one quote they thought was written nicely. It said the context is basically like what people were talking about, and that he was leaving the impression that his satanic majesty had paid a visit to Earth. So they're saying that Spring Hill Jack, the people thought he was like the devil, like literally the devil.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, that is descriptive. There's quite a decoration there to the atmosphere at the time. Yeah.
Chapter 2. What happens in chapter 2?
So chapter 2 is, again, it's first person account of Spring Hill Jack. I don't remember how it gets started because it is kind of in the middle of nothing. He's like climbing up a building.
That's it. He's on the street. He sees like a commotion going inside a second story window.
Yeah.
There's a woman and a man sort of like in the window moving about. And he's
And
like,
he can tell there's
"Something's
two
going on."
people. Yeah. And he just like jumps up, and he's even like saying in his mind, like, I'm not that bad of a guy. Like, I don't do what these people are saying, right? Like,
right. He's like, they call me a villain, but like, I think there's something that's real villainy afoot here. Like,
yeah.
my spidey sense is tingling. Something's wrong. And he jumps up to the window.
He jumps up to the window. He does this like some semi like acrobatic thing, and that the book like writes out that like, oh, if he misses this, it might be the end or whatever. And he like does it somewhat easily. And it's very, and I see the comparisons to Batman and other heroic characters like that. But acrobatically jumped up. He does some like basically some secret agent stuff to like pop holes in the windows and
he
stuff.
uses his ring to cut a square out.
Ring on his glove so he can cut a piece out of the glass so he can hear, and he does something else. He like pushes a pin through or something so he can see better, so he can see what's going on. And essentially what he witnesses is this guy and this woman, and the woman is crying. She seems really upset, and the guy is saying like, look what I have in my hand. I have a check in my name that was forged by your husband, and having this evidence will send him to jail and will ruin both of your lives for the rest of time.
Yeah. A prison boat specifically.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he talked about sending him to America or something, I think. They're sending him somewhere.
A prison boat. I wish I had more. They're called Hoax. If we had more time, we'd talk about it, but it's another crazy Victorian London thing.
Yeah. And so then and so he basically he's blackmailing her. He's saying like,
right,
I can go and ruin your lives, or you can just spend an hour of pleasure in my company. Wink, wink.
Yeah. He says, give me your consent. He's like blackmailing her.
Yeah, he does say, give me your consent. That's exactly right. That's what he said. And this woman is like, no, I how can I possibly do that? I've got a reputation. I gave an oath of love to my husband, yada yada. And he was like, oath, what are you talking about? Like, this guy just blatantly like screwed you over by writing this check and forging it. Like, he was willing to give you up when he did this thing. And they just kind of go back and forth a little bit of how she's like saying like, please have mercy, please don't make me do this or whatever. And then Spring Heel Jack is on the other side, and he's thinking like, this is truly evil. Like, yeah, I scared some people, but this is like a really truly evil person, and I can't let this happen. And then the blackmailing dude is like, listen, lady, I'm going to give you 1 minute to make a choice. And he like pulls out his pocket watch, and he like starts counting down, and she's like upset, crying, going back and forth, trying to decide what to do, and saying like, please have mercy on us, please like let it go, essentially. And at the end of the minute, the guy's like, listen, last chance, I need your answer. And she basically is like saying, yeah, I'll do it, I consent, Right. And then at that moment, Spring Heel Jack like busts through the window and scares the tar out of this dude, takes the check from him.
He grabs him by the neck.
Yeah, I didn't know how to read that, because it sounded like, when I first read it, it read like he slit his throat, which is not what he did.
No.
Yeah, but yeah, because he's got those big like claws and stuff, and he grabbed him by the neck, and the dude basically, kind of paraphrasing ahead, he runs out of the room and he starts like shouting like, Spring Heel Jack's here, like help, 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 and people start like popping out, and Spring Heel Jack is like, I got to get out of here, and he grabs the woman, jumps out of the window in like an escaping kind of way. And then when she like comes to, essentially, he's like, listen, here's the check, get rid of it and get out of here. Like, and it seems like he was making a point to say like, I'm Spring Heel Jack, like the people that everyone hates. I just saved you in a big way. So like, maybe get that word out for me. And like, that's kind of the end. It kind of cuts off abruptly.
So yeah, it's kind of starts to build him in chapter 2 of this Penny Dreadful, right? They immediately start building him as a hero. They've sort of heel turned him of like, he says, I've got some red in my ledger. Like I've given some people a hard time, but like, I'm really not all that bad. Like I never bought anybody anything never stole anything from anybody, never killed anybody, right? And like, there's real villains, right, in the world, and I could do something about it, right?
Yeah.
So you can already see how that starts to sort of like realign with Batman. Like we said, the Penny Dreadfuls would continue. There was this 40 chapter series, but there were many more. Some people told me to go look at the Human Bat, which is the volume 4 in the Spring Hill Jack library that Mackley put together. And I read a little bit of it. The story puts a normal person at the center of the story who's under suspicion of being Spring Hill Jack. People think he is. And he spends the rest of the novel trying to figure out who the real Spring Hill Jack is to clear his name. So Jack is not a hero. He's, in fact, they make him a horror monster instead. They basically make him a vampire. He shapeshifts into different animals, bites one of the victims at his neck. And in the first few chapters, is drawn as a literal bat. So it's like a bat flying around, in the sky with like kind of a human face. It's a little weird, right? And that's where the Human Bat comes from, is because he's like a devil, vampire bat thing, and Spring Hill Jack is a villain. So I don't think that's actually particularly relevant as an inspiration to Batman, other than how it inspired the next volumes of the Penny Dreadful. In 1904, there was a relatively short series of 12 stories published serially, attributed to an author named Alfred Burrage, and this is one that probably caused people to draw the direct comparison to Batman. He's humanoid again, rather than being a vampire. And because of that prior connection with Bat, in the one that had just been coming out in a couple of years prior, he's literally Bat. The drawings of him include him kind of wearing a bat cape kind of thing.
Really cool looking. It's a really cool. Oh man. I'm going to describe the one on the right, because that's the one I'm like familiar with. And it's, I don't know if these are grave robbers or what, but basically there's a tombstone. There's like 3 dudes that are all looking like real surprised. And we've got Spring Hill Jack standing with, it's kind of like George Washington crossing the Delaware. It's like he's got like one leg up on the tombstone, and he's got his arms up to, I don't know, kind of like a Y, like the YMCA Y. And the cape is coming down from his arms, and it's got the scallops, just like Batman does. He's got white pants, but like pretty much everything else is black. He's got black shirt with like, it kind of looks like he's got ribs on it, which I will say looks really cool.
Yeah, it looks like a skeleton painted on.
Yeah, he's got like black belt, black boots, black cape. He's got it looks like a Batman cowl on, like even with the ears, except it doesn't cover his face. It just kind of like does a heart shape around his eyebrows, I guess, and covers. It's like a skull cap that comes down as a cowl.
Yeah.
And it's got the ears, and then it looks like a big red feather coming out of his like forehead, like sticking up, kind of like Jafar, I guess, from Aladdin. It's a pretty epic pose, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't think it's like the most Batman thing like ever, but if you look at it and you say, hey, is that kind of like Batman? You'd say absolutely, right?
Oh yeah. Because
he's doing kind of a Batman pose. He's got the scallops.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you looked at this and you said to just any random stranger, any random person on the street, and you said, there was a superhero inspired by this character, who is it? Every single one of them would say Batman, if they knew who Batman was. They probably would. Yeah.
I read the things coming off of his head more as horns than bat ears.
Oh yeah. It looks. It's this. I'm describing the comparison. Sorry, but
yeah. In this version of the story by Burrage, we get to know his wealthy alter ego. So like we learn his real name, and he's an aristocrat, right? He has a butler who helps him. He uses smoke to disappear from the scene, or simply disappears in the middle of conversations. Another thing that he does is that he cuts the letter S into things as a calling card wherever he goes to remind people of Spring Hill Jack, much like Zorro would leave the Z. Yeah. There is no evidence on the record about Bob Kane or Bill Finger reading Spring Hill Jack or even being aware of Spring Hill Jack. But you can definitely see the comparisons. Sure. And not just with him, but also, I would say, even more strongly with Zorro.
Definitely.
So, it's definitely the case that if not direct inspiration, it's part of the inspiration lineage. There's no way this is not in the chain that leads to Batman.
I did see a name when I was watching that video, but like even back in the mid 1800s, they were supposing that if Spring Heel Jack existed, it was
The Marquis of Waterford.
yes, the Marquis of Waterford.
Yes.
And they talked about, and I don't know if there's any evidentiary value to this at all, but one of the eyewitness testimonies or whatever was that he had W's on his gloves.
Yes.
And that
For
is
Waterford. Yeah.
for Waterford. And I'll be honest, I saw that and I was like, Wayne? But
that's really funny.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, even way back then, and so Spring Heel Jack, Zorro, Batman, it's all an aristocrat. Aristocrat, excuse me. Someone who has a lot of money and can afford to do shenanigans like this and hopefully be a hero.
Yeah, I didn't prepare a lot of notes on the sort of like detective work of like people trying to figure out who it was because so much of it rings as like this thing probably never happened.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of work done in the 1800s and today of like, okay, if someone was going to do Blue Flames, how would they do it? Right? Like if you were doing stagecraft. I
saw a thing for that too. It sounded like magic, but yeah. And I mean magician magic, not like actual true mystical magic, but yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of people at the time, the police who were tasked with like trying to figure this out, who did think, okay, if someone was going to do this, they'd have to be rich, right? Because they're, scaring people with like, chemicals and things and they're dressed well. And yeah, one of the prime suspects is a guy named, I can't remember his real name. Marquis is his, like his noble title.
Yeah.
Like,
I can probably look that up.
But he's the guy that's, who made famous Paint the Town Red. He was known as like a troublemaker in London at the time.
What I was seeing was basically saying the same thing that he was. I can't remember what word they used, but yeah, a troublemaker, a partier, but also like caused a lot of trouble. Like it seems like the kind of guy who'd be rich and have a lot of like drunken disorderlies and DUIs and stuff like that.
I think the famous story is that they literally painted things red one night when they were out drunk. Hence, Paint the Town Red.
Seriously?
Yes, that's Marquis of Waterford. It's that guy, same guy.
Oh no, I missed that what you were just saying before. Yeah. So like literally painted the town red. Yes. This guy is the source for that.
Yeah.
That saying. Holy smokes. That's crazy.
And they think he might have been Spring Heel Jack too.
Yeah.
Henry Beresford, the third Marquis of Waterford.
Got it.
So yeah, it's Spring Heel Jack. Do you have any other thoughts? Closing thoughts?
I'll be honest, I think I had heard of the name before, knew nothing about it before we started the podcast. And now the urban legend here is pretty legit, especially like the illustrations we have for it. Mm-hmm. Makes me curious that they don't seem to have turned that into like TV shows and stuff like Zorro.
I think there is some modern examples of fiction, but definitely nothing that has like penetrated the popular culture.
There was Springman. I ran across that, which is kind of crazy. But was it Springman and the SS is the specific example? But
it's like a propaganda short film, right?
Yeah. It's a 1946 Czechoslovakia animated short film, The Springman of Prague, chimney sweep, and it's called the chimney sweep in the United States. And yeah, it's pretty much Spring Heel Jack, like literal springs in the feet. It just kind of jumps around, and I've seen little shorts of it. Basically, makes fools out of Nazis.
I love that.
I mean, yeah, I hate Nazis, so I love making them look foolish. And it's short, 14 minutes runtime. But I thought that was kind of a funny thing, especially like the timing. It is post creation of Batman. It is a animated short film, and if you look up like pictures, looks like a superhero. It's got like the superhero. I guess this one's kind of goofy. I saw another one where it like looks like a straight up superhero, which I don't know. It's kind of like full circle where researching this character that may have been an inspiration for a superhero that also became a superhero at some
there
point.
You go.
Yeah.
Hey, Bat family, we're throwing up the bat signal. If you made it this far, we hope you liked the show. If you put a like on the video, it'll help us find more Cape Crusaders. And if you subscribe, you'll never miss a future episode. Drop a comment down below telling us what we got wrong. Or you can head on over to batlessons.com and write us an email or send us a voice memo. We'll talk about your feedback on a future episode of the show. That's also where you can find show notes and transcripts for every episode and links to all of our social media. Thanks for listening.